Morning, everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes. We'll get started promptly at noon. I want to let everybody have a chance to get collected and get online here. Morning, everybody. We're just going to wait a few minutes. We'll get started promptly at noon. I want to let everybody have a chance to get collected and get online here. All right. That's why we start early, so that we can take care of silly little bugs like that. Okay, so I've got the chat window open. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw them up in the little chat window that you'll find on the YouTube Live page. Welcome. This is this month's offering from NDI Presents. This is the brown bag series for WCAG and Section 508 compliance. Basically, it's an overview. And we're going to talk about how it affects us and what are the things we can do to try and help make it an easier transition from not doing WCAG at all to doing WCAG at the source of the content rather than trying to implement it after the fact. All right, so anyway, got my distractions all taken care of. We're going to go ahead and get started. Oh, and of course, there's one thing I missed here. All right, so there's that. Okay. All right, so, oh, I got to share my screen. You should all be able to see the presentation now. Okay, so basically 508 and WCAG, Section 508, I tend to use these two synonymously, but they're not. Section 508 is an actual legislation. I guess I should go through the agenda first, since that's the first slide that popped up. We're going to go through the purpose. I'm going to talk about that first. Who is the W3C and why that matters. We're going to look at web content accessibility guidelines, which is the WCAG, WCAG. We're going to look at the 4 principles. We'll look at, why do I have WCAG guidelines in there twice? We're going to look at Section 508, types of disabilities, because 508 and WCAG are making your digital content accessible to people with disabilities, in the event that you didn't know that. Accessibility is not the same as usability. We're going to focus on the easy stuff, focus on compliance. What to look for is a section where we're going to talk about how to start adjusting your content in advance. And then we'll talk about different tools and resources. Okay, so again, Section 508's primary purpose is to provide access to and use of federal executive agencies' electronic information by individuals with disabilities. So it is legislation. The legislation is part of the Workforce Rehabilitation Act of 1973. The amendment is titled Section 508, requires that all electronic and information technology components that are either developed by or purchased by the federal government have to be accessible by all people with disabilities. I just got a question that hard to hear. Is anybody else having any difficulty? So moving on, the mandate does not provide any requirement to the private sector. So Section 508 does not apply to Joe Blow on the street building his website. Now, he's more than welcome to comply with Section 508 or WCAG, but it's not a requirement. Thank you, Louis. Section 508 covers all informations of information technology. I mean, all areas of information technology. It's not limited to web pages. It's not limited to audiovisual components like videos or whatever. It covers everything. Didn't mean to hit that yet. There we go. A simple definition is that an accessible system needs to provide access to information that is comparable to the access of a non-disabled individual. So, for example, I don't consider myself disabled, and I have a certain level of access to this presentation that you're watching right now. I need to provide, as a federal agency, I need to provide a comparable level to my access to someone with a hearing disability. I have a lot of deaf friends, and if they were to currently watch this video, they would get nothing out of it because there's no subtitles. So quite simply, to make this video 508 compliant, all I would have to do is subtitle it. So there's a perfectly good example. Oops. See, when you're on the wrong window, things go wacky. Okay. So what is the W3C? The World Wide Web Consortium, so that's W3 and consortium, is an international consortium where member organizations, some full-time staff, and the public all work together to develop web standards. These guys are the World Wide Web rule makers. Have to say rule, can't say law, because none of it is mandated to the general public. They are business practices, best practices, recommendations on how to provide, that kind of thing. The WAI, Web Accessibility Initiative, is being built in coordination with organizations all around the world to pursue the accessibility of the web for the 4 primary areas of work: technology, tools, education, and outreach. They also provide coordination for research and development. So those are the 2 governing bodies for the World Wide Web stuff. There we go. So what is a general web content accessibility? And I just remember why it's on the agenda twice, because I actually defined web content accessibility guidelines as an umbrella, and WCAG is actually different. So the W3C has developed the standards for the Web Content Accessibility Group's current version, which is currently 2.0. It's similar to Section 508, but Section 508 is not international. Section 508 is an American mandate. It's recognized by the ISO, so it is an international standard. It requires more specific techniques, and it is substantially more strict than 508. There are 3 levels to the Web Accessibility Guidelines: A, AA, and AAA. And they are each assigned to a specific element in web accessibility. Now, one other difference between WCAG, or web accessibility, and 508 is 508 covers everything digital. So access to your tablet, for example, is required to be 508 compliant. But access to your tablet is not something that WCAG would actually cover. WCAG is specifically web content. So there's a lot of overlap between the 2, but in some cases, WCAG is a stricter for web-based information. Another concept that we have to pay attention to is POUR, P-O-U-R, and it stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. These are the concepts that Section 508 and WCAG follow. So perceivable, basically you're providing text alternatives for non-textual content. Okay, so images. An image, if the image has something to say, then it would need to have an alternative. If you look down on the lower left, you'll see the NDI logo. A text alternative for that in the alt tag or the description tag would have to say Network Designs Incorporated logo. The P, however, is really just for looks. So it doesn't need any kind of alternatives because its technical alternative is written right here, perceivable. So in some cases, you have to have the alternative because the content is important, but in other cases, the alternative makes no difference. If this page that you're looking at now were an actual web page, then this little triangle would be an image, or maybe the entire top piece with this little triangle. But that little triangle is a visual. It's not important information to be translated, so it wouldn't need any kind of alternative. But if the entire blue component was, including that little triangle, well, now you do have something that you have to translate, so that would need an alternative. All right, so you're providing alternatives for time-based media as well as separate content from the style, making it easier for users to see and hear all of your content. So that's perceivable. The O is for operable. You want to make all the functionality available from a keyboard. Now, I'm old school. I don't like using the mouse as much, especially when I'm developing. I prefer having my my UI tools and my editors all have extensive keyboard controls so that my hands don't leave the keyboard. I'm much faster that way. Think typewriter, right? All the keys were right there in front of you. If that typewriter did something, it was because you touched a keyboard, not a mouse. That's the school I come from. So in the web, though, that's an entirely different concept than we're used to. You click around, you don't keyboard around. So we've had to come up with ways to make the keyboard function in the web. Usually it's by tab delimitation and using the up and down arrow keys to be able to expand things like a drop-down box or enter key to hit a submit button, and you tab to it to get to it. You got to give the users enough time to read and use content. So having things that fly up and then fly away are a bad idea. If a thing flies up, it needs to stay up until the user goes over and clicks or using the keyboard is able to dismiss that fly in. So think of modal, where it says, yes, thank you for submitting this form. And that thank you should stay there long enough for them to have time to read it and then acknowledge it by saying, okay, you're welcome, or click to go away. Do not use content that causes seizures. Now, it's been a big, giant no-no to have blinking text or blinking elements on a web page for a long, long time, and that's really what that's referring to. But it's not just blinking that causes seizures. There's also swirling. So if you think about the entrance to the Twilight Zone series had that swirling thing that was supposed to mesmerize you. That's actually not a good thing to have. So we don't want to do that. Provide ways to help users navigate, find content, determine where they are on their page. So helping users navigate if they're sight impaired is crucial. That's a very high focus, high priority element to build into your 508. Screen readers and text-only web browsers are very helpful in determining these things. We'll go over those tools later, but that's what we're talking about here. All right, O is for understandable. You want to simplify the text content. The web pages should operate in a predictable way. This is one of my pet peeves right here. As a QA tester, one of the things that I call the developers on so regularly, and you find this issue more when you have multiple developers working on interfaces at the same time. The issue is clicking this button on this page does one thing, while clicking that same button on another page has an entirely different way to operate. So if we look at the page you're staring at right now, clicking Poor Principles on any normal web page, if that's the name of your company is Poor, that would take you back to the root home page, right? Well, while having something like this SDVOSB logo would take you to that website, the SDVOSB explanation, something to that effect. Where on one page, let's say that clicking here takes you home, clicking on the NDI logo takes you home, while clicking over here throws a pop-up that says, oh, this means blah, blah, blah. Those are entirely different operation between the two different pages, and that's just bad design. Consistency is key is my favorite catchphrase. And consistency comes from the UX designer, and everybody has to be following the UX guidelines. All right, so we want to help users to avoid mistakes and correct them if they do make them. One of the best UX people I've ever had the pleasure to work with, her rule was, don't lead a user into a mistake. And, you know, ever since the first time I heard her say that, it's always stuck with me in it, because it really just, it makes sense. You don't want to do things that are going to cause mistakes. We'll go into more examples of that in a little while. All right, the R is for robust. Maximize the capability, the compatibility with other products, including your assistive technologies. Your assistive technologies are any current tools, any tools that are being planned that help a disabled individual communicate, read and understand, listen to and understand, navigate within your offering, whether your offering is a web page or an application of some sort, or even a desktop product. You want to make sure that what you're building is flexible enough and robust enough that it will stand the test of time. You don't want to build something against a screen reader that is already, you know, end of life or something to that effect. So the 12 guidelines under POUR, these are the primary basis for your WCAG and 508 compatibility. Provide textual alternatives, watch out for time-based media, make the site adaptable to different kinds of hardware technologies. Make items distinguishable on the page. You've probably heard the areas where the color contrast between the text and the background are too close. You might be able to see them clearly, but someone with a colored issue, like I'm colorblind in the blue series, in the red series too, but where some pinks and reds look just like red and white to me. In the blue series, I get royal blue. I don't get anything else. There's no light blue for me. Keyboards need to be accessible, or the system needs to be keyboard accessible. You have to give plenty of time for anything. In one of our clients, one of the things we use is a notices that the client's requirement was that you have to be logged out after 20 minutes of inactivity. So to make sure that we're compatible and compliant under the 508, we put a notice there that says you are reaching your expiration. Would you like to renew that expiration? Do you need more time, or can we go ahead and just close your session? All right, so watch out for things that might provide seizures. Make sure the site is fully navigable, it's fully readable, it's fully predictable. Provide any input assistance that might be there, and it is fully compatible. So the WCAG, I said this before, the WCAG is widely understood to be a voluntary standard. It's not a requirement yet. There's a lot of push for it to become a requirement, but currently it is a voluntary standard, where 508 is not. 508 for the US government is a requirement. Now we make this distinction because 508, being 508 compliant does not mean your site is going to be accessible. So that is the distinction. So what is 508? 508 is legislation known as the Workforce Rehabilitation Act. I went over this a little bit ago. It doesn't apply to the private sector. The federal government uses its buying power to make products available from the public sector to be compliant with Section 508. So, for example, Windows is 508. And Windows is not required to be 508. However, the federal government said, we're not buying it if it isn't. So you have to make it if you want to sell it to us. An accessible system, a simple definition for Section 508 is that it is an accessible system provides access to the information that is comparable to the access of a non-disabled users. We went over that a little bit ago too. Did I miss one? Yeah, I did. Okay. Why are you doing that? Ah, there we go. All right, hands off the keyboard. Okay, so there are 4 primary types of disabilities, and you know this might be a loose interpretation of the definition of a disability. However, it is a real interpretation, which is the key. So again, you've got the difference between 508 and WCAG. WCAG says accessibility, while 508 says compliance. So the types of disabilities that I've listed here are accessibility issues, not compliance issues, which is, in my opinion, a stricter way to approach. Basically, I found that all WCAG compliant tools, like if you build a website and it is WCAG compliant, it is 508 compliant. However, not all 508 compliant tools are WCAG compliant, and not all 508 compliant tools or products are accessible. So the key is to build for accessibility. So if you're building for accessibility, you've got to build for realistic disabilities. So some disabilities are situational. For example, a passing disability due to a change in present circumstances. I wear glasses. It's that simple. I should be able to, on my tablet, zoom in so far that I can read everything there is on there, no matter what my eyesight is, without my glasses. Obviously, it's not going to work for a blind person to just zoom in and be able to read it, but you could be in a loud room or in bright sunlight. There could be a software incompatibility to another component that's on your device or on your laptop. User settings are another one that can cause situational disabilities. Imagine taking your laptop outside, or you probably had your phone outside on a sunny day, and you have to tilt it and twist it and hide it from the sun so that you can read what's on the screen. Technically, according to the device, you're blind, you're unable to read what's on there. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just say something to the effect of, okay, read everything you see to me, and then you don't even have to be able to see the screen. Doesn't matter, it just reads it to you and you can blindly operate the device. Okay, temporary disabilities are where your situation is expected to improve or resolve. So think about a cast or an ear infection, eye surgery, a non-native speaker, for example. The cast is a good one. Somebody breaks their arm and can't use the mouse or can't type properly, or ear surgery or eye surgery where you're temporarily blinded or temporarily deafened. So those are good examples. A chronic disability is something that is not expected to improve. So you could actually be blind, deaf, or hard of hearing. You could have poor motor skills, like Lou Gehrig's disease or something like that, where you're shaking all the time. Cognitive or intellectual difficulties, learning disabled, mentally challenged individuals with those types of mental, physical disabilities. Device disabilities. Lack of simple standards compliance would create a traumatic device disability. So if Windows didn't hold to the same standards that a Braille keyboard company did, then that Braille keyboard company wouldn't work with Windows, and there is a device compliance problem that is causing a device disability. It could be something as simple as your monitor not working with your computer, and now you can't get to the content. You still have full access to the content, but you can't visually see it to be able to function with it. All right, so those are the different types of disabilities we have to concentrate on. And now we've talked about this already. What is the difference between usability and accessibility? So a website can comply with all of the standards and pass all your automated testing and still appear to be fully accessible while not necessarily being a usable site. Pages can be verified by the focus groups and still be inaccessible to a third party. Individual users may have a cognitive, technical, or other barriers. So one of the keys that we want to pay attention to is making sure that we get a good broad demographic for our focus audience. I'm a firm believer in focus groups, whether they're a large group or a small group, but that focus group needs to have a broad selection of your target audience. So pilots, for example, you're not going to find a blind pilot, but you will find a deaf one. So you need to be able to have people who can represent the disability properly and have several of them, because they're each going to have a different understanding of what's going on. All right, I think I'm rolling through kind of fast here. So you want to fix the easy stuff first. And so to target, for example, a legacy site or a site that you have not focused on 508 or WCAG yet, here's a good list of a place to start for your web-based product, whether it's an application or just a website. But your web-based product is going to be to fix your alt text issues. So you've got alt text, description, and long description are components of an image that with an image on your site, the image generally is not accessible. So you apply an alt text, again, using the example of this triangle. If this was just this triangle, or versus the NDI logo, you're going to want the NDI logo to have an alt text in it, but something that is just visually appealing doesn't need to. You're going to want to provide alternate formats for your content. A lot of times, especially nowadays, the one content is delivered using various style sheets. So you'll get a style sheet for text-only browsers, a style sheet for print, a style sheet for no audio, a style sheet for Firefox, and a style sheet for Chrome. And depending on how you come into the site, it will, oh, and I left mobile out of there. So depending on how you come into the site, whether it's through mobile or a text-only browser, or you've got screen readers running or something like that, you're going to want to have an appropriate style sheet. Old school for that, before style sheets came into play, and for those who don't know how to use them, you can just create a replicant site styled appropriately. It's typically very easy to do, especially to go from a fully styled to a completely unstyled site is a very easy transition. All right, you're going to want to correctly label all of your HTML items, your links, tables, forms, correctly set your tab spacing, your tab indexing. All of these items should be completed, and that's all done in the code. That's all done in the HTML. Some best practices for usability for web development are to simplify the pages, including language. The federal government's got a huge push over the last couple of years to simplify the language that they're using, simplifying the design and the navigation of the system, and making sure that the navigation is consistent and repeatable, so that it's used on every single page. Use a resizable, clear font face, something that's easy to read, like Arial is a beautiful one. All of my stuff comes out in Arial these days. You want to make sure that it's resizable so that it looks just as good on a tablet, zoomed all the way in when I forgot my glasses, as it does on a web page on my 12,000 DPI screen. Got a question here from Lewis. Are there definitions for the levels of compliance that we can code to? Hypothetically, should one of our projects be usable by someone 100% blind, and who makes the determination? There are different levels. WCAG has levels for the elements. Let me scroll back to that page here. So if you look on the bottom, you've got 3 levels of this guideline, A, AA, and AAA. And so again, WCAG is not an official, it's not a mandated element like 508 is. And 508 does not specify any levels. It just says it has to have these elements. So again, 508 does not, compliance with 508 does not indicate accessibility, where compliance with WCAG typically indicates accessibility, because if you get to an A item, for example, an image tag must have, a hard image tag that is used to disseminate information must have an alternate text component. So when the text-only browser doesn't show the physical image, it will show the alternate text component. Where an indication element like this guy here saying, oh, you're on this tab, let's say there's 5 tabs up there and you're on this tab, it doesn't necessarily, although it should have it, it doesn't have to have a alternate text element. But what you do have to have on that tab is a component, a text component that says you're on X tab or Y tab of 5. So that as they scroll through the tabs, they'll see the different tabs. All right, so I hope that answers your question, Lewis. If not, ask it in a different way, and we'll see what we come up with. All right, so moving on with the easy stuff. Reproducible links, or reduce the number of links, and the click-throughs. We do have a 3-click rule typically, where if it takes you more than 3 clicks to get to the content, it's really too deep. There's a lot of caveats to that rule. Some of these federal web pages that we work on are, can be many pages deep. I want to say hundreds, but it's not usually hundreds. It's usually more than, it can often be more than 10 though, which is kind of ridiculous. You want to have a consistent navigation profile. You want to have contact info for that page content as well as for the site page. You want to have pages that load quickly. And you want to verify all your codes, hyperlinks, spelling, your CSS, all that stuff. Should be verified automatically as well as manually every time you release. I love my regression testing. Okay, so focusing on compliance, some of the key things to look for. Definitely need to look at logical and contextual consistency. Again, consistency is key for me. When something is not consistent between 2 pages, it just throws the power and the flexibility of that site off. People just, they start to lose faith in the overall content because the site isn't built properly. Programmatic exposure of the elements. You want to limit that as much as possible. Proper HTML coding is certainly important. Non-mouse, again, non-mouse and non-textual. So your non-mouse navigation is all keyboard-based, using your tab up and down keys, page up and down, enter. And your non-textual information is things, again, like this little tick up here. I'm glad I used this slide because it's giving me great examples. For example, this guy right here, where it just says identify in the center, that's not important information for a blind person to see. They're going to get all the concepts of this slide without knowing that there's a box right here that says identify. Although it adds visual keys, it is not important information. So this would be a non-textual component that would not need to be included. Time-sensitive processes, you want to watch out for your timeouts and your shopping carts. You definitely want to watch your colors and your contrasts. Colors and contrasts are a big one. Typically for people who have difficulty seeing, not blind, but legally blind, and there's a big difference between that, and people who have color blindness, which is a tremendous amount of people in this country have color blindness. All right, priorities are unique for each environment, so you need to pay attention to the product that you're building, because some products, for example, if you're building something that is for pilots only, you don't truly have to worry about a blind person needing that data. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be a blind person working on the flight line somewhere doing something that they might need to get to that data, so you'd have to watch out who your demographic is. Consider the compliance scope, and not every part of the product needs to be compliant completely. So if you have, if you built an application, for example, and there's an administrative side to that application, the only item in the administrative side is to create new users manually, and you have one person in your entire organization that does that. And when that person leaves, you will put one person in responsible for that product in that capacity. So that component of the product probably doesn't need to be fully 508 or WCAG compliant. You'll just have to know that you got to put a guy who can operate those tools in there, or an individual that can operate those tools in there. You've got to make sure that you're in compliance with any applicable laws and standards and any goals that your company might have. You want to make sure that your audience and the capability of the people who are your audience, your target demographic, and their devices are all key priorities. Again, this takes us back to focus groups. Pilots are another good example. Pilots not only use their phones, but they also have what they're calling now a digital flight bag. So their digital flight bag, in some cases, if they work for a company, the flight bag could be provided by a company. So they're all going to have the same iPad or Google tablet or whatever. But if it's just Joe Blow and he's got his own private digital flight bag, he could be running it off of a Kindle, you know, one of the fire units, or something that we haven't seen in a while, you know, a Chinese import tablet that runs some crazy Android. We also want to pay attention to likely situational scenarios, because those situational scenarios, remember, can cause disabilities. Trying to read your phone in the sun, again, is a perfect example. So, you know, you want to make sure that you're looking for these items: keyboard navigation. You don't want to interrupt any user set accessibility components. So if a user is regularly hard of hearing and they crank up the text size on their laptop so that they can regularly read without having to make additional changes every time, you don't want a style sheet that's going to blast that out just because you don't like the way it looks. You don't want applications or products that are going to override those user settings. That includes their resolutions, any contrast settings that they've got. You want to do things like indicate the current focus, whether it's in the mouse or a frame or where the cursor is on the screen. You want to indicate the focus, and you should be able to, as a blind individual, you should be able to call a read aloud element that will tell me where my focus is. You got to provide sufficient information about each of those key elements, because that's what the screen readers use to do things like provide you with the current focus indicator where your mouse is. Your mouse is currently sitting in this such and such box. So the such and such box needs to make sense. Your mouse is currently sitting in the first name field of the user form, is how it should read out to you. Not your mouse is currently sitting in the A152 form field. That makes no sense at all. Although it might make sense programmatically to call your field A152, but if it doesn't make sense to the user, then it's useless. Again, you want to make sure that you've got consistency throughout every page. Your layout is the same, your functionality is the same, your navigation is the same, colors and schemas should all be the same. You're providing textual equivalent for all different kinds of informations, for standards, and your standard controls are textualized and not graphic. You're providing textual equivalents for images and videos, and any kind of audio that you've got going can be textually equivalent for the blind person. Your color coding needs to be conveyed in some other way. That's one of the big things we see all the time. Think about the stoplight, right? Red, yellow, green. We use it a lot of time for product compliance, or in a project schema, you're delivering the project status to your customer, and you have a stoplight that says green product. Our project is in the green. Everything's going great. Yellow, our project is in the yellow. We've got a couple of risks happening or something. Red, the project is behind. It's way over budget. We have some serious problems. You have to find another way to advertise that red, yellow, green other than just the stoplight, because the stoplight is a color-coded component that a colorblind person might look at that and just see 3 levels of gray. Now, as a colorblind person, I'm going to say that I know the red one is always on top and the green one is always on bottom, and the middle one is always, halfway between the two. So, but if it textually said beside red, the product is currently in red state, indicating that blah, 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 blah. That's what's important. So all of your information that's video or animation or audio only should all be provided as an alternative in a closed caption component, or if it's a video, a downloadable transcript of the video. Images would have alt text or long descriptions, that kind of stuff. All information in your forms must be accessible to the screen reader. Oops. That's another good one. And again, we're back to your blinking. Now, your blinking requirements are nothing should blink slower than 2 Hertz or above 55 Hertz. And that's averaging about 3 times a second. So anything that blinks faster than 3 times a second or slower than 3 times a second is a problem. Generally, the industry standard right now is don't blink. Don't use anything that blinks. And all pages should be fully readable without their style sheets, which is another key component of mine when I'm testing for 508 compliance. You yank the style sheet out using one of the tools, and I'll show you how that works in a second. But you yank the style sheet out, and you see what the site looks like without it. And as long as it's all fully legible, fully navigable, and still functions properly, then you're in good shape. All right, so that pretty much takes our compliance themes and our priorities. Where's my next page? Just covered the what to look for. Here's your blinking below and above, right? This is the stuff I just read through. It appears that my notes screens and my slide screens are not in sync. That's all right. Okay, so here are some of the tools. Some of the tools, and these are all tools that I use, and I'm very happy with them. The Cynthia Says portal, basically, it's you go to this page, you type in your URL into their little line, and it comes back and gives you a report on the 508 or WCAG compliance. You set the level of standard that you want checked against, and it will do that. It'll come back and give you a report. So that's always where I start. I start with that, and that report gets turned in as part of my 508 compliance. Here's the Cynthia Says portal report. And then I go through that report and I break it down into items that, for example, if you have an image like this right now, Right Tools right now, doesn't portray anything, so it wouldn't need a graphic. I mean, wouldn't need an alt text. However, if you have the alt field in there and the alt field is blank, Cynthia Says we'll report on it and say your alt field is blank. So that could be a false positive, right? So I go through the Cynthia Says portal report and I pull out all the false positives and I say these aren't things that you need to worry about. Then I go through and I say, oh, but it did find this one and this one does need an alt tag. Okay, so the Wave accessibility evaluation tool. Wave is a company that puts together a lot of accessibility components, and they're really great. I use them a lot. They have several extensions for various browsers. I use the Chrome one because it works the best. Using text mode is another Chrome extension that works terrific. It gives you the text-only version of your site, as if you were looking at it in Lynx or other text browsers. And it does that by yanking out the style sheet. Okay, Lynx is an official text-only browser. It's a free one. And the WebAIM 508 checklist is another good one. It's literally just a 508 checklist. You go 1, 2, 3, right down the list. And all of the components are there. You check your page by page, your site page by page, or your product page by page to make sure that you're compliant. But again, that's 508, not WCAG. All right, let's see, what else do I have? So that's pretty much it. You can find more information on my 508 links and tools page. There's a link for it right there. There's the section 508.gov stuff. And the US Web Design Standards, which is really great for finding what the industry standards are supposed to be. Does anybody have any other questions? I know I tore through this presentation really quickly, but I think it's going to work out all right. Here's our YouTube page, and here's the page and information for this particular. Oops, there we go. For this particular brown bag. So you'll find all of the NDI Presents brown bag information at this address here. And this address here is for the 508 compliant one specifically, 508 WCAG. So again, if there's no questions. All right, let me flip the screen back on here. Stop and back to the video. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions come in. So if anybody's got any questions, you know how to reach me. If you leave comments on the YouTube page, I'm more than happy to get to those. Or you can email me. You can hit me up on Hangouts or any of the other myriad of connectivity tools that we use. And otherwise, thank you all for visiting. I know I had a competitor event today, so I appreciate those of you that came in and bared with me for this hour. And if you guys have anything that you want trained on in the future, by all means, let me know right away, and I'll start getting it on the schedule. All right. Thanks again, and take care.